Hi everyone. Welcome back. We're glad to have you with us today. Let's start. The warm, inviting glow from the living room lights greeted me as I stepped inside, shaking off the strain of yet another long workday. Friday nights were sacred, a time for Emily, my wife, and me to relax, decompress, and chat about the weekend ahead. But something was different tonight. There was a weight in the air, an uneasy energy I couldn't quite place. I dropped my bag by the couch and made a beeline for the fridge, pulling out the beer I'd stuck there earlier that morning. The crisp sound of the bottle cap, twisting off, echoed in the quiet, almost too loud for the stillness of the house. With a heavy sigh, I sank into my usual spot on the couch, hoping the cool drink and familiar surroundings would help me unwind. That's when Emily walked in. She didn't greet me with her usual smile. Instead, her face was set, her expression more serious than I'd seen in a long time. Without a word, she sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. "We need to talk," she said finally, her voice steady, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. Those words hit me like a punch to the chest. "We need to talk." The phrase hung in the room like a storm cloud. I placed the beer on the coffee table and leaned forward slightly, my heart beginning to race. "All right," I replied, trying to sound calm. "What's going on?" Emily hesitated for a moment, her fingers nervously twisting the small silver bracelet she wore every day. "James, before we start thinking seriously about a family, I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said slowly, her tone measured but uncertain. The way she framed it made my pulse quicken. Starting a family had always been the dream, the natural next step after 5 years of marriage. Her hesitation felt like an invisible crack forming in the foundation of everything we'd worked toward. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my voice as steady as I could, though every nerve in my body screamed for answers. When she finally looked me in the eyes, there was a mix of fear and determination that unsettled me. "I think I need to explore other options, just for a little while, before we fully commit to starting a family." I stared at her, struggling to process what I'd just heard. "Other options?" I repeated, the words tasting foreign as they left my mouth. She nodded, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "I mean dating, seeing other people, just temporarily." The silence that followed was suffocating. I couldn't speak, couldn't even move as her words sunk in. She wanted to date other men while staying married to me. It was so outrageous, so ridiculous. I almost laughed, but any trace of humor was buried beneath the anger rising in my chest. "You can't be serious," I said finally, my voice tight and low. Emily shook her head, her resolve unwavering. "James, I have to do this. I need to be absolutely sure about us before we take the next step. And your solution is to date other people?" I shot back, disbelief dripping from my words. "While staying married? What am I supposed to do? Sit here and wait for you to come back?" Her expression shifted, a flicker of defiance breaking through. "I'm being honest with you," she countered, her voice sharper now. "Doesn't that matter?" I wasn't letting this slide. "Where the hell did you get an idea like this?" I asked, trying to rein in my growing frustration. For a moment, she hesitated, but then she gave me a name. "Jessica." "Jessica," I repeated, practically spitting the name. "You mean your coworker, the one who's been divorced 4 times? She's been through a lot," Emily said defensively. "She knows what it's like to deal with doubts and ignore them. She told me it's better to face these feelings now than to let them grow." I stared at her in disbelief, my mind reeling. Jessica had always been a bit overbearing, but I dismissed her as harmless. Now, she felt like a poison that had seeped into our lives. "So you're taking advice from someone who can't keep a relationship together for more than 5 minutes?" I said bitterly, unable to hold back. Emily's jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. The argument snowballed from there, every word pulling us further apart. Eventually, I laid down my ultimatum. "If you want to explore," I said coldly, "then it won't be happening under this roof. This house is mine, Emily. My parents gave it to me, and I get to decide who stays here." Her eyes widened, clearly shocked by the finality of my tone. "You don't mean that," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I mean every word," I replied, firm and unyielding. If you walk out that door to pursue this, don't expect to come back. For a brief moment, I thought she might back down. But then her chin lifted, and I saw the determination settle back into her expression. Her chin lifted slightly, and I saw the unwavering resolve return to her eyes. "I need to do this," Emily said softly, her voice steady, almost quiet, as if convincing herself as much as me. The next few hours blurred into a tense silence. Emily moved around the house with a calm determination, her every action deliberate, as though she needed to feel in control of the chaos she'd created. By the time the clock struck 8 p.m., she came downstairs, dressed to the nines. The sleek black dress she wore fit her perfectly, and her makeup was flawless, accentuating the same beauty I had once fallen for. But tonight, that beauty only deepened the ache in my chest. The betrayal was sharper, more personal. As she picked up her clutch, I couldn't stop myself from throwing out a cutting remark. "Did you forget your luggage?" I asked with a sarcastic edge. "You won't be coming back once you leave." She shot me a pointed glare, but replied with an unsettling calmness. "It's just one night, James. I'll be back in the morning." My voice turned to steel, cold and unrelenting. "If you walk out that door tonight, the locks will be changed before you get back." Her hand paused on the doorknob for the briefest moment before she dismissed me with a wave. "If you love me, you'll let me do this," she said, her tone almost rehearsed. A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "If you loved me, you wouldn't be going." Outside, the honk of a car horn cut through the silence, signaling Jessica's arrival. Without a second glance, Emily walked out the door, leaving me standing there with nothing but my anger and the echo of her footsteps. What she didn't know was that I'd prepared for this. Months earlier, I'd installed tracking apps on her phone, not out of mistrust, but as a precaution for her safety during late-night drives or work trips. Tonight, they would serve a very different purpose. The moment the door closed, I activated the microphone on her phone. Jessica's voice came through clearly, light and cheerful. "He's probably fuming," she said with a laugh. "But don't worry. A little charm and some extra effort will bring him back around." Their carefree laughter only fueled the storm brewing inside me. While they joked about how easily I could be won over, I channeled my anger into action. The house felt eerily quiet without her presence, but my thoughts were anything but still. I started by changing the locks. There was no way she would be walking back in unannounced. Next, I reprogrammed the garage door opener, cutting off her access entirely. Then I turned my attention to her belongings. Piece by piece, I packed every trace of her life here. Clothes, shoes, toiletries, jewelry, even the little souvenirs and trinkets she'd collected over the years. By the time I was done, her car was loaded with everything she'd left behind. The house felt emptier, but the weight pressing down on my chest had started to lift. But I wasn't finished yet. I logged into our shared bank accounts and withdrew half the funds, my rightful portion. Then, I canceled our joint credit cards and transferred most of our investments into accounts under my name. This wasn't just about securing my finances. It was about ensuring she couldn't pull me into any more of her reckless decisions. As I worked, I kept listening through the app. Jessica's voice was calm and encouraging, feeding Emily the same hollow reassurances that had led her here. "This is just a phase," Jessica said. "He'll come around eventually." "They always do." They laughed together, their words dripping with condescension. Each laugh, each casual jab at the life we had built, added fuel to the fire inside me. This wasn't just about one night of betrayal. It was about ensuring Emily truly understood the consequences of her choices. Later that evening, I sat at my desk with my headphones on, tracking her movements through the app. Emily and Jessica had gone to a trendy downtown club, a place I knew all too well. Using the app's audio feature, I caught fragments of their conversation. "Tonight's all about letting loose," Jessica said with a breezy tone. "Forget about James. You deserve this." Emily's laughter carried through the mic, light and unburdened. "You're right," she said. "I just need to have some fun for once." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For her, this was a carefree adventure, a break from responsibility. For me, it was a betrayal of the trust we had spent years building. As the night wore on, I overheard snippets of her interactions with another man. Her voice had taken on a flirtatious tone, unmistakable in its intent. It was as if she'd either forgotten she was married or simply didn't care anymore. I recorded everything: audio, location data, and even short video clips captured through the app. Every piece of evidence was a painful reminder of the person she had chosen to become, a stranger wearing Emily's face. When she finally returned to Jessica's place in the early hours of the morning, I had already begun laying the groundwork for my next steps. The weekend ahead was going to be critical, a chance to set things in motion and take back control of my life. I knew I had to prepare myself, both emotionally and financially, for the fallout that was surely coming. Saturday morning, I sat down to review the recordings from the previous night. Listening to Emily laugh and flirt with another man as though I didn't exist was gut-wrenching, but it only strengthened my resolve. By midday, I contacted a lawyer I trusted and laid out the entire situation. I want to protect myself, I told him plainly. Whatever steps I need to take, I'm ready. The lawyer's advice was direct and clear. Document everything, secure my assets, and prepare for what could be a contentious divorce. With that guidance in mind, I spent the rest of the day tackling the logistics. I gathered financial records, consolidated accounts, and began drafting the paperwork for the divorce. Each step, though tedious, felt like progress, small victories in reclaiming my life. That afternoon, I turned my attention to my old truck, my trusted workhorse for years. It had seen better days, but working on it gave me a way to channel my restless energy. Replacing the engine, swapping out the transmission, and giving it a fresh matte black paint job became my escape. With each bolt tightened and every panel restored, I felt a renewed sense of control. By the time the job was done, the truck looked brand new. It stood as a tangible reminder that even broken things could be rebuilt, stronger and better than before. When Friday evening arrived, I decided it was time to treat myself. After a long shower and a fresh shave, I dressed sharply: a black button-down shirt, new Levi's, and a pair of rattlesnake leather boots. A quick spritz of cologne finished the look. I drove downtown to an upscale steakhouse, determined to enjoy the night entirely on my terms. The meal was perfect: a juicy T-bone steak, a buttery baked potato, and a crisp salad. But the true satisfaction came afterward. As I walked out of the restaurant, I checked the tracking app. Sure enough, Emily and Jessica were back at the same club as before. I couldn't help but smile. The timing couldn't have been better. Parking a few spaces away from Emily's car, I paused to gather my thoughts. Tonight wasn't about confrontation. It was about making a point that I wasn't sitting at home, waiting for her to figure things out. With that in mind, I walked into the club, the familiar thrum of bass reverberating through the air, blending with the chatter of the crowd. It didn't take long to spot Jessica. She was sitting at a corner table, her gaze darting to the dance floor where Emily was twirling with another man, completely oblivious to my presence. I approached Jessica smoothly, holding a drink in my hand. "Jessica," I said, flashing a polite smile. "What a pleasant surprise." Her eyes widened in shock. "James, what are you doing here?" "Same as you," I replied casually, a small grin playing on my lips. Since Emily moved out, I figured I'd check this place out and enjoy myself a little. Jessica's unease was obvious. Her usually composed demeanor faltered under the weight of my unexpected arrival. She let out a nervous laugh, glancing toward the dance floor where Emily was still caught up in her carefree moment. "Fun, huh?" she said, trying to regain her confidence. "Absolutely," I said with a light chuckle. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, I added, "Speaking of fun, care to dance?" She hesitated, her eyes scanning the room as though searching for an escape. But in the end, her pride wouldn't let her refuse. She nodded and stood, joining me on the dance floor. The music was upbeat and lively, the kind that had everyone moving. I made sure to keep my energy high, drawing the attention of those around us. Jessica played along, but I could sense her discomfort growing as the minutes passed. When the music shifted to a slower tempo, I didn't give her a chance to back away. I placed a hand gently on her lower back, guiding her into the rhythm. She stiffened slightly, but didn't protest. Before she could say anything, I caught sight of Emily approaching from the corner of my eye. Her expression shifted the moment she spotted us. Her carefree laughter vanished, replaced by a mixture of shock and simmering anger. Emily stormed toward us, her heels clicking sharply against the floor with every purposeful step. "James," she said, her voice sharp and demanding. Emily's voice rang out, sharp and accusatory. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her tone cutting through the noise of the club. Without missing a beat, I replied smoothly, dancing. I released Jessica's hand and took a deliberate step back, offering Emily a casual shrug. "It's a great place, isn't it?" Her eyes narrowed as they flicked from me to Jessica, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. "You're trying to ruin this for me," she accused, her frustration spilling over. I let out a short, dry laugh and shook my head. "Ruin it? No, Emily," I said evenly, locking eyes with her. "I'm just here to have a good time. Same as you." She opened her mouth to retort, her expression shifting between anger and disbelief, but I didn't give her the chance. "If you'll excuse me," I said, stepping past her with a polite nod, "I'm going to grab another drink." The rest of the evening, I made it a point to stay visible. Jessica, clearly shaken by my presence, struggled to hold on to her usual composure. Her attempts to calm Emily were becoming less effective by the minute. Meanwhile, I drifted through the bar, striking up light-hearted conversations with others. It didn't take long to make my message clear. I wasn't the shattered, heartbroken husband Emily had likely described to her friends. Every time I caught her glancing in my direction, I made sure to flash an easy smile, as if her being there didn't affect me at all. The subtle act of indifference felt like taking back some of the control she had tried to wrest away. As the club started winding down, I decided it was time to leave on my terms. Jessica had retreated back to their table, busy trying to console a visibly upset Emily. I approached them with a relaxed air, my jacket slung casually over one shoulder. "Well, ladies, this has been fun," I said with a slight grin. "But I think I'm done for the night. Take care." Emily's glare was so sharp it could have cut glass, but I didn't stick around to see if she'd respond. I walked out of the club, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The weight that had been pressing on my chest was finally starting to lift. The ripple effect of that night was more profound than I could have expected. Jessica, once Emily's most loyal confidant, started to pull back. The cracks in their alliance became obvious during their phone conversations, which I continued to monitor through the tracking app. "Why did you let him get under your skin?" Jessica demanded during one particularly heated exchange. "I didn't know he was going to show up," Emily snapped, her frustration boiling over. "You told me this would be easy." Their arguments were music to my ears. The confidence they'd shared at the start of this misadventure was unraveling, and I enjoyed every second of it. To push things further, I began reaching out to a few of Emily's single colleagues, inviting them out for casual dinners or drinks. Some were hesitant at first, wary of my marital status, but I reassured them that Emily and I were separated, something that wasn't far from the truth. Word of my social outings quickly spread through Emily's workplace, creating visible tension between her and Jessica. The same advice Jessica had given her was now backfiring spectacularly. Office gossip painted a vivid picture of my new independence, and it was clear from Emily's increasingly heated phone calls that she wasn't happy about it. Her anger seemed to grow with every passing day, and her complaints about me became a constant refrain in her conversations. But I didn't stop. Each outing, each quiet victory, was another step toward regaining control of my life. The breaking point came when I found Amelia at home with her supposed friend. It happened on a Tuesday night. I had just wrapped up a long meeting with a new client and decided to head home early. The house had been feeling more like a staging ground for my plans lately than a home, but I was ready to grab a cold beer, kick off my boots, and get some quiet time. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something odd. There was a car parked out front. It wasn't Emily's or anyone else I recognized. A wave of unease washed over me, but I pushed it aside. Maybe it was nothing, a friend stopping by, or one of her coworkers. Still, I parked a little further down the street, my instincts telling me to keep things low-key. When I approached the front door, I didn't hear any conversation or noise that might explain the car outside. Instead, there was only muffled movement. The porch light flickered slightly as I unlocked the door, quietly stepping inside. That's when I heard it. Emily's laugh, soft and flirtatious, coming from the living room. And then another voice, a man's voice, low and unfamiliar. I froze for a moment, anger flaring like a lit match. I knew Emily had crossed boundaries before, but this was our home, the one place I thought she might still have the decency to respect. Quietly, I moved toward the living room, staying out of sight but close enough to see what was happening. Emily was seated on the couch, her body angled toward a man who was lounging far too comfortably for my liking. He was tall, casually dressed, and clearly at ease in a place he had no right to be. On the coffee table, there were 2 glasses of wine, half empty, and Emily was laughing at something he'd said, the same laugh that used to be mine. I stepped into the room before my anger could boil over any further. Am I interrupting something? My voice was calm, but it carried enough weight to make them both jump. Emily shot up from the couch, her eyes wide with panic. James, what are you doing home? I live here, remember? I said, fixing my gaze on the man, who now looked incredibly uncomfortable. You mind explaining who this is? The man stammered, clearly not expecting this confrontation. I'm a friend of Emily's. We were just... Save it, I said sharply, cutting him off. I turned my attention back to Emily. You really thought this was okay? Bringing someone into our home? Emily crossed her arms, trying to summon some semblance of composure, but I could see the cracks forming in her defense. It's not what it looks like, James. We were just talking. Talking, I said, letting out a bitter laugh. With wine, on our couch, while I'm still paying the bills here. I don't think so. The man muttered something about leaving, clearly desperate to escape. Without waiting for an invitation, he grabbed his jacket and slipped past me, muttering a quiet, sorry, as he hurried out the door. Once we were alone, Emily's panic gave way to defiance. Why do you even care? You made it clear you don't want to be with me anymore. You're right, I said, my voice cold and steady. I don't. But this is still my home. Emily, you had no right to bring him here. Her expression faltered, the weight of her choices finally starting to sink in. I didn't think you'd be home. That's the problem, I shot back. You didn't think. You never think about anyone but yourself. This is exactly why we're done. She opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself, her shoulders sagging as though the fight had drained out of her. I made a mistake, she said quietly. Can't we just... No. Interrupta firmly. We can't. This just confirms everything I already knew. You don't respect me, our marriage, or even yourself. There's no coming back from this. For the first time, Emily looked genuinely defeated. The usual fire in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by something closer to regret, or maybe just exhaustion. But it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't here to fix her. I wasn't here to give her another chance. The papers are ready, I said, my voice steady but resolute. This is over, Emily. You need to pack your things and find somewhere else to stay. She stared at me for a long moment, searching for something, mercy, forgiveness, a way out. But I had none left to give. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing alone in the house that was no longer hers. That night, I felt something shift inside me. The pain of her betrayal still lingered, but the anger, the hurt, the weight of it all, it didn't feel as heavy anymore. For the first time, I truly felt like I was moving forward, leaving the past where it belonged, behind me. Emily had made her decisions, and now it was time for her to face the reality of them. By the time the divorce papers were ready, I had built an ironclad case. Every recording, every bank statement, every detail of her actions. I had documented it all with meticulous precision. My lawyer assured me that we had everything we needed to protect my assets and ensure a favorable outcome. Meanwhile, Emily remained oblivious to what was coming. Through the tracking app, I overheard snippets of her conversations with Jessica and others. She spoke of our reconciliation as though it were a foregone conclusion. He'll come around, she said with unwavering confidence during one call. He always does. Those words only hardened my resolve. She truly believed she could waltz back into my life like nothing had happened. but I was determined to show her that choices have consequences. The evening of what would have been our 5th wedding anniversary arrived. It was the perfect moment for the final act of my carefully planned strategy. I invited friends and family to what I described as a celebratory gathering. Everyone assumed it was a party to mark the milestone, and I saw no need to correct them. Emily arrived late, as I'd expected, dressed to impress. Her elegant gown shimmered under the lights, and she moved through the crowd with the poise of someone who believed the night was hers to command. She smiled at the guests, soaking in the attention, but there was something hollow about her confidence, a subtle fragility that became more evident as the evening wore on. While I mingled with ease, chatting warmly with our mutual friends, Emily's interactions were noticeably tense. It was clear that some of them were aware of her actions, and their quiet judgment hung in the air like a weight. As the night progressed, I gathered everyone in the living room. The hum of conversation faded as people turned their attention to me. Emily stood beside me, her smile still in place, though her posture had stiffened. I could see the faintest flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice calm but commanding. "Thank you all for being here tonight. It's a special evening, and I have some important news I'd like to share." Emily's expression shifted, curiosity blending with a hint of unease. "First," I said, allowing a small smile to cross my face, "I've made a major career change. As of last month, I left my job to start my own consulting business. This new venture gives me the freedom to focus on what's truly important in life." The room responded with polite applause, though Emily's smile barely flickered. If anything, she looked more uncertain than before. "And second," I continued, letting my tone grow sharper, "I've made a significant decision about my future." I stepped aside, and from the crowd emerged a woman with striking red hair and a serious expression. She carried an envelope in her hand and walked directly to Emily, her movements deliberate and unhurried. "Emily Parker," the woman said in a calm, professional tone, "you've been served." A stunned silence fell over the room. Emily's confident facade shattered as she stared at the envelope in disbelief. Her hands shook as she opened it, her eyes scanning the pages inside. Gradually, the full weight of the situation began to sink in. "You're divorcing me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes," I said simply, my tone firm and resolute. "For months, I've watched you dismantle our marriage piece by piece. I've had enough." Her face contorted with anger and humiliation, the sharp edges of her pride cutting through her shock. "You're doing this? Here? In front of everyone? How could you? How could I?" I repeated, my voice rising with indignation. "How could you, Emily? How could you betray me, walk out on everything we built, and then expect me to just wait for you to figure things out?" The room was heavy with tension, the guests exchanging awkward glances. Some looked visibly uncomfortable, while others nodded quietly, as though they had seen this coming all along. Emily's composure was gone, replaced by a mixture of fury and shame. She had come here expecting to bask in attention and control, but now she was left exposed, facing the fallout of her choices. "Figure things out," I echoed, my voice steady yet firm. The tension in the room was almost tangible, pressing down on everyone present. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, some visibly shocked, while others nodded subtly, as though they'd seen this moment coming from a mile away. Emily's family sat stiffly, their anger written plainly on their faces as their glares locked onto her. Meanwhile, my family stayed quiet, but their presence offered me a sense of calm and solidarity I desperately needed. Emily, however, was falling apart. She lashed out in a tirade, pointing fingers in every direction, blaming me, blaming Jessica, even blaming her own doubts and insecurities for the situation she found herself in. But her words landed hollow, alienating her even further from the people in the room. Instead of sympathy, all she managed to earn was quiet judgment. When the last guest finally left and silence descended on the house, I sat alone in the living room. The envelope Emily had been served still lay on the coffee table, a stark symbol of everything that had unfolded. The weight of the evening pressed down on me, but along with it came a surprising sense of relief. For the first time in months, I felt like the endless turmoil was behind me. This wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning, a chance to reclaim my life and leave the pain of betrayal where it belonged, in the past. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly. Emily tried to fight the terms, but the overwhelming evidence I'd carefully gathered left her with no ground to stand on. Even her own friends and family, after seeing the reality of the situation, encouraged her to accept the inevitable. Eventually, she signed the papers, and with that final act, our marriage came to an official close. After we broke up, something changed. It was as if the reality she had been avoiding finally hit her. For weeks, she tried everything she could to get me back. At first, it was small, subtle gestures, leaving messages on my phone, apologizing for everything, and asking if we could talk. But as I ignored her calls and texts, her attempts became more frequent and desperate. She started showing up unannounced. One evening, I came home to find her waiting on the porch. She was holding a casserole dish, smiling as though she thought dinner might fix everything that had been broken. "What are you doing here, Emily?" I asked, my voice sharp. "I thought we could talk," she said softly, stepping closer. "I made your favorite chicken pot pie. Remember how you used to love it when I made this?" I shook my head, unlocking the door without looking at her. "Emily, we're past this. You need to stop." "But I'm trying, James," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I'm trying to make things right." I didn't bother replying. I stepped inside and closed the door, leaving her standing there with her casserole. But she didn't stop. The next week, she sent flowers to my office, a massive bouquet with a handwritten note. "I miss us. Please let me fix this." My coworkers gave me puzzled looks, and the whole situation was beyond embarrassing. I threw the flowers in the trash and kept the note as another piece of evidence. When subtle gestures didn't work, Emily started escalating. She began using manipulation, digging into our past, and exploiting memories that she thought would soften me. She sent photos from our wedding day, texted me snippets of old love letters I had written her, and even dropped off a box filled with mementos from our relationship. It was an odd mix of guilt-tripping and nostalgia, but all it did was frustrate me further. Then came the tricks. Emily began accidentally running into me in places she knew I frequented. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, seeing her at my favorite coffee shop or at the gym, but it became clear she was following me, keeping tabs on my routines. One day, she even showed up at the restaurant where I was having dinner with a friend. She made a scene, introducing herself to my friend and awkwardly inserting herself into the conversation. "What are you doing here, Emily?" I asked, my tone laced with irritation. She smiled, feigning surprise. "Oh, I didn't know you'd be here. What a coincidence." It wasn't. And the more she tried to force her way back into my life, the angrier I became. Her presence felt suffocating, like she was trying to claw her way back into a space where she no longer belonged. One night, she left a handwritten letter in my mailbox. The tone was different this time, more manipulative. She accused me of being cold and heartless, blaming me for giving up on our marriage too quickly. She even hinted at trying to use the legal system to drag out the divorce, claiming she deserved a second chance to fix what she'd broken. That was the final straw. I realized Emily wasn't just trying to reconcile. She was trying to control the narrative, to paint herself as the victim and me as the villain. It wasn't about love. It was about power. And I wasn't going to let her take any more of it from me. The next morning, I called my lawyer and told him everything. "I need to make sure she can't keep pulling these stunts," I said. "I want her out of my life for good." Together, we took steps to ensure Emily couldn't interfere anymore. I filed for a restraining order, citing her harassment and the constant disruptions. The evidence I had, text messages, emails, her unannounced visits, made it clear she was crossing boundaries. The order was granted, and she was legally prohibited from contacting me or coming near my home or workplace. I also tightened my security. I changed my phone number, blocked her on every platform, and installed cameras around my property. I even alerted my workplace, asking them to deny her entry if she ever tried to show up again. The measures were extreme, but I wasn't taking any chances. When Emily received the restraining order, her attempts to reach me stopped immediately. For the first time in months, there was silence. No calls, no texts, no unannounced visits. It was as though she had finally realized that her games wouldn't work anymore. I felt relief, but also a bittersweet sense of finality. Emily had once been the woman I thought I'd spend my life with, but now she was nothing more than a chapter one was ready to close for good. In the weeks that followed, I focused entirely on rebuilding my life. The space Emily had once occupied was now filled with peace, clarity, and hope for the future. I knew she would never be able to reach me again. Not physically, not emotionally. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Once the dust settled, I turned my focus inward. I deleted the tracking apps, no longer needing or wanting to monitor her movements. She was no longer a part of my life, and I refused to let her linger in my mind. Instead, I redirected my energy into rebuilding myself and my future. My new consulting business became a source of pride and purpose. Creating something entirely my own gave me a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't experienced in years. As time passed, my social circle expanded. I reconnected with old friends and forged new relationships, rediscovering the joy of authentic, meaningful connections. For the first time in a long while, I felt unburdened, unshackled from the weight of everything Emily had left behind. 1 year later, I found myself walking through a lively street fair, hand in hand with someone new. The laughter of children and the vibrant chatter of vendors surrounded us, a backdrop of simple happiness that mirrored how I felt. The pain that had once consumed me was now nothing more than a distant memory, replaced by a calm sense of peace and optimism for the future. The journey hadn't been easy, far from it. It had tested me in ways I never could have anticipated. But in those trials, I found resilience. I learned how to let go of the bitterness, to stop clinging to anger, and to embrace the endless possibilities that lay ahead. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and orange, I couldn't help but smile. I had weathered the storm. I was stronger, wiser, and finally free. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. See you soon.